There seems to be some problem with my speakers or microphone, I guess. So I had to redo the whole thing. I had to join on another uh, phone now. I hope I'm audible now and visible also, clear also. Now we'll go into today's lecture, right? This was something I saw this morning uh, around 5:30, right around 5:30 this morning when I was going for my morning walks, and even up till, right, you will see this morning around 8 this morning, right? I saw this wonderful scene in front of our side gate, right? So just wanted to give you a few snippets before we go into today's class. And the next one also, right? This is from today's morning, this morning's snapshot of your college, right? And this one also is I took it this morning around 8 10 or 8:11. Yeah. So um, we were discussing something on how the humanists played a very important role in shaping the Elizabethan Age, the Renaissance. I told you these famous pioneers, right? These humanists, they paved the way for the others to follow. And a whole lot of, I told you, the humanists, followed by the educationists, and then the Reformation and religious controversies. The prose writers, the novelists, the poets, no one comes into play in the beginning, right? It was the humanists who started or sowed the seeds of the Renaissance in England, right? The Renaissance reached England from the shores of Italy, we all know. We saw the Oxford Hellenists, how people from here, great scholars, men of learning who went all the way to Italy and then brought along with them the treasure troves of wisdom from Italy, came back here and then established centers of learning. And we also saw a few of the humanists. We also saw some four educationists. Now we are into the Reformation and religious controversies. And please remember, before you write about an author or a poet, every poet will have their USP or unique selling proposition. Every author or poet will have their style, their charm, their aura that makes them unique. You should make a note of it or you should observe it. That's what makes your writing qualified to be special. And so, and not only that, what is special, right, about their style, about her style, about his style that makes that writer click? Thomas More, he had a particular style. Erasmus had a particular style. Like Wordsworth had a particular style, Coleridge had a particular style. Coleridge was supernatural, Wordsworth was natural, Blake was mystic, and you have, Milton had the grand style. So all these authors, these writers, as you trace them, when you have a cursory look or glimpse at their style, you can relate better with how they present their arguments, right? So the Reformation and religious controversies is the third subdivision of this particular topic. Um, I told you in the previous class itself how humanism always crossed with religion because humanism had a different law code, a moral code, while religion had a different moral code. The law code or the moral code of religion was always based on the scriptures, while for the humanists, it was a code that was made or devised or designed in convenience to the society in which people are placed, not based on a law code that was universal. They wanted specifics based on ground realities. So, the second point, writers had to choose between Pope and Luther or Calvin. So the religious controversies, because they needed patronage, so writers had to choose between Pope and Luther or Calvin, right? So just after Utopia happened, Thomas More's Utopia happened in 1516. It was translated into English in 1551, right? He wrote it in Latin, and we saw in the previous class why he wrote it in Latin. And then after Utopia happened, Martin Luther published his famous thesis at Wittenberg. Right, it was controversial for uh, the elite in those days when he came out with his thesis, where he questioned some of the existing vices that were prevalent in the church. Right, the church, right from Chaucer's time onwards, right, religious establishments were always centers of. Right, I'm not saying this. Right, it is literature that tells us religious establishments are always centers of evil also. Right, there were some vested interests who wanted to always, you know, make the most of these uh, religious devotion of the people in the past. Right, and so what happened was, in England, the people sold, they sold indulgences, and these indulgences were pardons, and when they were purchased, right, they were purchased for a premium. Martin Luther questioned these indulgences to build the cathedral in Rome, right? They were asking for, it was not the faithful who did this, right? Others who were selling indulgences, right? Martin Luther questioned them, and that's how the Reformation and religious controversies happened. And after this, right, after Martin Luther published his thesis in the year 1517, right, at the famous, right, Wittenberg chapel, after that, there was a huge schism or division that happened even in the literary scenario. We'll see that three matters were there for controversy in that particular period, in the 15, 16, 17, 18 period. Right? These are the three important matters that gave right gave rise to controversies. What are they? The question of the translation of the Bible into English. Please remember, in those days, they didn't want the Bible to be translated from the original into English because they thought they thought that translating something would rob the original of its essence. Right? They wanted to maintain the sacredness, the sanctity of the original, and so they didn't want it to be translated because they didn't know who will translate it and how it will be interpreted or misinterpreted or represented or misrepresented in the vernaculars. And so they were always against the translations. But because the translations were not available and the scriptures were available only in the original, the lay people couldn't access what was there. And because they couldn't access what was there, the the clergy or the religious rulers, they always had a grapple hold on the people. That's because the lay people couldn't read the scriptures for themselves, and Martin Luther was one who advocated these translations into English. But Thomas More, who later was canonized as St. Thomas More, right, he was against the translation of the scriptures into English. So this was one controversy that happened. And the second controversy was King Henry VIII's break with the papacy. And the third controversy was the dissolution of the religious houses or the monasteries. Please remember, in 1453 also we saw when the Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks, there was a dissolution or a ransacking of the libraries that happened. Now again in the 1530s, almost 100 years later, you find almost the same thing happening in the dissolution of the monasteries. Why? Because when monasteries were dissolved, what happens is the money that they had, the treasure troves of wisdom, the library collections that they had, the archives that they had, faithfully preserved for ages and ages and ages, were also ransacked or plundered. This is what mob mentality is all about. When something has been preserved for generations and generations over the ages, carefully in monasteries, right? And suddenly one fine day, because of some whims and fancies of the rulers, like here it is King Henry VIII, what happens is there was a plundering, not only a plundering, but a rummaging, a ransacking, a destruction that happened of the monastic libraries. Right? So three controversies, have them in mind. So we began with the humanism, went into education. Now we are in religion or religious controversies, and three matters were there for controversy. The first one is the question of the translation of the Bible into English. The second one is Henry VIII's break with the papacy, and the third one is the dissolution of the religious houses. So this is something that you need to have in mind, just to have an idea of what exactly went into the translation of the Bible. Why was there so much politics involved in the translation of the Bible into English? Said Thomas More. He did not advocate, or he did not want the translation of the Bible into English. Oh my God, I didn't switch on the right into English. But William Tyndale, he was influenced heavily by. So this is where friends got divided also. Erasmus took the side of the Protestants, and Thomas More went the Catholic way. Right. So William Tyndale was influenced by Martin Luther, and right, he went ahead with the translation of the Bible. Although in England, King Henry VIII was adamant or vehement in proscribing or banning this translated version of the Bible. But unfortunately, or ironically, what happened was the same King Henry VIII had to break with the papacy, and then he had to order for the killing of St. Thomas More, right? The same King Henry VIII, who in 1518 onwards, he started writing the Defense of the Seven Sacraments. When Martin Luther published his thesis in 1517, the very next year, King Henry VIII, the king himself, wrote a defense of the seven sacraments. The king himself wrote it. But the same king in the 1530s, because he had to marry Anne Boleyn, he came out of the faith, and there was a break with the papacy because the Pope did not allow him to be married yet again. King Henry VIII, we all know, married 6 times, right? So because he wanted a male heir. So the second point here, Tyndale, inspired by Luther's example, began to translate the New Testament into English. Tyndale's version of the New Testament was a basis for the famous authorized version of the KJV, the King James Version of the Bible, that came up in 1611. So More had to convince the people, especially his fellow, church people, why he didn't want the Bible to be translated into English. And he had to, because he was caught between the devil and the deep sea kind of. Now he was in a predicament, a double bind, a dilemma. Because the same people, they advocated that everyone should read the scriptures, but now he says that he doesn't want the lay to read the scriptures in English. Now he had to justify why he says that. He was in a kind of a double bind. Right? So to More, the church was not absolutely opposed to the translations of the Bible, but only to unfaithful versions, he says, right? Falsified by heresy. So that's why he says he opposed the translation of the scriptures into English. And Henry VIII broke with the papacy because of his own personal whims and fancies. And in 1516, this is the timeline, right? A quick timeline. Utopia was published. 1517, 31st October, the 95 Thesis was published by Martin Luther. And in 1519, Henry VIII started working on the Defense of the Seven Sacraments as a rejoinder to Martin Luther's attack on indulgences. So it was published in 1521. In 1525, Henry became impatient with Catherine's inability to produce a male heir. See, the status of women in Elizabethan England, or during the Renaissance also, especially in the kingly domain itself, you find that the women's voice was not heard. Right? There she becomes a subaltern. Subaltern in the sense she cannot have her say. Whatever the men found or deemed worthy, they did. So they were objectified. The women are objectified, and just because she was because of her inability, she was unable to bring forth a male heir for him. Right? He had to go for another girl who was 25 years, 9 years younger to him. He was 34 years old then, and 25-year-old Anne Boleyn right? He was enamored, but Anne Boleyn, he had a lot of mistresses also. Anne Boleyn's own elder sister was a kind of a mistress to him, but Anne Boleyn refused to be his mistress. Mistress means you don't have a recognition as a wife. So she didn't want that status. So she was very adamant, and she also said she'll wait for a marriage to be solemnized. So, he married her in the year 1532 when he was 41 years old, and in a wedding service which was held secretly, right? So they married, and in 1533, Anne gave birth to Elizabeth, who went on to become Queen Elizabeth. When was this? On 7th September 1533. Right? Anne Boleyn gave birth to Queen or Elizabeth, right, who went on to become Queen Elizabeth. The child was christened Elizabeth in honor of Henry VIII's mother, who was called Elizabeth of York. Right? So in 1535, he broke with the papacy. So this is the timeline that you need to have in mind. In the previous one you saw, 1516, Utopia happens, Thomas More's. Before that, yes, the groundwork was laid by the humanists, right, the educationists, and then, right, you have the religious and controversies and Reformation that's happening. And Henry VIII had created a stir and a controversy because of his personal whims, likes, and prejudices. So he marries Anne Boleyn in a secret wedding, and then 1533, she gives birth to Queen Elizabeth or Elizabeth, and then 1535, Henry VIII breaks with the papacy. So in 1536, many incidents happened, or many events happened that are of worthy of importance. That's why I've given you some 5 of them that are, that merit reading. In 1536, the most important thing that happened was the dissolution of the monasteries. Please remember, when the monasteries were dissolved, not only were the monks and the celibates who were there disintegrated, because when there is no monastery, they can't be there. You must have read, Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory, where one fine day a totalitarian regime comes up and says, we are going to do away with all kinds of religion, right? Religion is banned, right, in that particular country, in that particular nation. So like that, right? Here, because King Henry VIII passed an act of suppression, right? It's called, I'll give you that in the next slide. Through an act, he wanted to dissolve the monasteries, and because of that, higher education suffered, because most of the monks, the celibates, they were in centers of learning, and their commitment, right, the love for research and passion for learning. So all these things went for a toss because of the dissolution of the monasteries, and there was a plundering and a rummaging that happened. Most of the books in the library were ransacked, destroyed. Some were preserved, right? Although most were destroyed, some were preserved. By whom? We'll see that in the following slides. And then in 1536, see the irony of ironies. Henry VIII, who loved Anne Boleyn and waited to get married to her, in 1536, he executed her on Tower Green. Can you just imagine this? A person who loves a girl, marries her, and the same King Henry VIII, right? Within a few years, he has her executed on Tower Green. In 1536, William Tyndale was persecuted and put to death, right? Thomas More also was decapitated in the previous year. 1536, yes, the new act for the dissolution of monasteries, the act of suppression, right, was formulated or promulgated. And in 1536, one more thing, John Calvin's pioneering work in Protestant theology. See how the Protestant faith evolved or emerged or came out from the Catholic faith. So every faith has its own aura, its truth, its veneration, but there was a reason that necessitated the coming of the Protestant faith, That's why the word Protestant means those who protest, right? Some of the right some of the policies, some of the tenets of the Catholic creed. That's why the Protestants. And you have another sect, another group called the Puritans. Puritans, like they are extremes. Right? They are austere, like the Puritans. You call them. No, they they don't want to have any pleasures of this world. They feel that all the pleasures of this world are nothing, right, when compared to the treasures of heaven. So the Puritans are extremes, right? So you have the Protestants, the Protestant faith, coming up only in the 16th century. That is in the 1520s, right? Thanks to a whole lot of things that happened. Not only Henry VIII's break with papacy, Martin Luther's questioning of the indulgences. He posted right the 95 theses on at Wittenberg, and John Calvin, who was heavily influenced by Martin Luther, also came up with a wonderful pioneering work of Protestant theology called Institutes of the Christian Religion. Now, the dissolution of religious houses. So, the dissolution of religious houses or the monasteries, right? Religious houses in the sense the priories, a whole lot of things happened there, right? That's why the common word, I've taken this word from this book, right? Dissolution of religious houses. That's why I've given you the word religious houses. But elsewhere it is given monasteries alone. But monasteries is a specific word. From 1535 but I'm sorry, it's not and. I started it as between, right? Between 1535 and 1539, there was a suppression of religious houses. King Henry VIII disbanded all the monasteries in England, Wales, and Ireland, appropriated their income. There were other reasons also why he disbanded the monasteries, because the monasteries had a lot of money with them, wealth with them. Right? Chaucer talks about it, no, in his Canterbury Tales. Right? So they had a lot of money with them. So he wanted that money. So if you dissolve the monasteries, what can happen is, right, you can confiscate all the wealth that they have for his own vested personal interest. He wanted to make use of the money, and he sold off their assets also. Right? They had assets all over the place. He sold off their assets, again, still more money. There was an enormous destruction of books that happened, deplored even by the Protestants themselves. They couldn't bear it to see books being rummaged, ransacked, plundered, and destroyed. Right? So the two great universities also, as a result, they lost a considerable number of students from among the monks, right, who were there in most of these universities. As a result, higher education suffered. Please remember, higher education should be the focus not only of the city, not only of the state, but also of the nation. Because higher education is where research happens. Higher education is where scholarship blossoms. In Arjuna Padarai's beautiful essay, 2005, isn't it? Right, yeah. Just check out the year again. He writes, right to research. He says, you and I are blessed and privileged to be part of the higher education scenario, because not many would come into the higher education scenario itself. Many drop out even with undergraduation sometimes. Higher education means, right, you disseminate wisdom. That's why, PhD is called Doctor of Philosophy. Philosophy means love of wisdom. This morning for my MPhil class with your seniors, I was telling them that. I was asking them to read a few books on philosophy. When I said, MPhil is called Master of Philosophy. That means, there is a love for wisdom. You should disseminate not only knowledge, but wisdom from whatever you research. Higher education should be the pivotal thrust of any university, any college, any institution. That's why they have deans, specific deans for higher education, or deans for research. In MCC also, we have dean for research. because that is where you come out with new information, right? Experiment, then come out with new ideas, new thoughts that could transform the land, the nation. So here, higher education suffered because of the dissolution of religious houses. So most of the books were plundered. However, the books that escaped the plunderers did not remain secreted. And this is a phrase that I took exactly from this book that I showed Kazamian, Leguian Kazamian. I love this phrase. Did not remain secreted and immobilized on the shelves of monastic libraries. For example, I have a book for years and years, but it is immobilized and secreted in my library. No one could read it or no one could have access to it. What is the use of the book? What is the use of the book? Then, such a wonderful, lovely book printed in beautiful page, beautiful paper, hundreds and hundreds of pages. What Milton says, no, a good book is the precious life blood of a master spirit kept and embalmed for a life beyond life. But it is going to be secreted and immobilized on the shelves of the monastic libraries. What's the use of it? Right? This is the question that they asked. Right? And so, right, men or people started reading the treasures in the libraries from then on. Right? This is a very important phrase, or even this word, antiquary. I want you to have this word in mind, because these antiquaries, or a kind of historians in a way, but those who preserve the archives, ardor, right, great passion for antiquaries. The great ardor of antiquaries, I've taken this phrase again from Kazamian, Leguian Kazamian, right? The great ardor of antiquaries dates from 1535 onwards. Please remember, a nation's archives speak for the nation. That's why Derrida says, no, in Archival Fever, he says, the archives are filled with violence, he says. Why violence? Because the archives can always be prejudiced. If I don't like something, I may not record it. See, the past, the history of England, you will find even the date and the time have been archived. As regards the lords, the dukes, the duchess, the princes, the queens and the kings, even the time of the birth, everything will be archived. But what about the lay? What about even the books published by those who are patronized by the kingly, the kings and the nobles, have been, right, archived. What about the rest? Right? These are questions for introspection for us. If you read Archival Fever by Derrida, you'll find some clues to analyzing these antiquaries from a better light, a better perspective. The great ardor of antiquaries dates from 1535 onwards. So who's an antiquary? One who collects, studies, deals in antiques, ancient works of art, or better, fragments of the past. I love this phrase also. Fragments of the past. The past cannot be taken in its entirety. You cannot glean the past in its entirety, but you can take fragments of the past, collate them, put them together, and then study them coherently. Because if these antiquaries had not preserved these treasure troves of knowledge from the past for us, today we won't be having access to this wonderful history of English literature, on how the English literature came down to us over the ages, right? So English literature of the Elizabethan age and the subsequent Elizabethan, Jacobean, Caroline, Commonwealth, and the Restoration, a whole lot of ages that followed, were heavily influenced by these antiquaries. They thank the antiquaries for giving them such compilations of the past. So, who was one of the first, the earliest antiquaries? John Leeland. Is also spelled Ley in some histories of English literature. He is spelled as Ley, but this book, right, an authentic one for ages, this gives you the spelling as Leland. Please remember him, John Leland, like Ashok Leyland. No, his original name was Ley. They some say John Leland was a pioneering antiquary. Antiquary means one who studies, collects, or deals in antiques or fragments of the past. So some people have this habit of collecting, treasures of the past. Some of you must be doing, philately, numismaticians, stamp collectors, coin collectors. Right. Some of you must have had your old floppy disks. When we were in college, we used to have floppy disks, not CD drives or what is that? The next advanced. Then we had mini disks, then DVDs. No DVDs, then floppy disks. I still have those floppy disks, and the floppy disk slot was so so sleek. Also, it was completely different from the ones that we have today. Today, in the laptops that we have, we don't even have a slot for the DVD drive, isn't it? Or the CD drive, right? Everything has come into the USBs. So, but some people still have an ardor for these antiquaries, right? I hope you also must be having your own collection of antiquaries, right? Antiques of the past. The first watch that was gifted to you when you were a kid. The first cell phone that you got. I don't have my first cell phone. I got it in the year 2002, the year that cell phones became popular in my first vocation, right? As a professor, as a lecturer. Within 3 months or 4 months, because I was away from home, I was in Madurai, an American college, right? I was staying in the hall, Washburn Hall. So I had to get a cell phone for me in order to communicate with my parents and friends. It was BPL, SIM card. SIM card was BPL SIM card. And the cell phone was so huge, right? It was like a brick, so huge, with an antenna on it. It was a Nokia, pale yellow in color. You didn't have a silent mode there. You didn't have a vibration mode there. So I bought it. Almost a month's salary, and I bought a second-hand phone. Remember that? Right? I bought a second-hand phone. And I came to MCC also. I had it 2003, right? 2002, 2003. When I came here also, I had it. But an MPhil student, his name is Ranjit. I hope he will one day see this also. An MPhil student, he saw this phone, and I said, I'm going to, replace this with a better phone. So he said, sir, this phone, you can never find it anywhere. Don't exchange it. I will buy it from you, he said. And so Ranjit John, his name is, right? So he got that phone from me. But the other phones, I still have them with me. The old Nokia phones, 1100, 1108, or whatever, right? I have them with me. Some people, like these antiques of the past. And when you try to connect, all these antiques of the past, they tell a story for you, isn't it? Diaries especially, right? When you write diaries, I hope some of you do. In the third year class, I was so happy to know that many students are writing down the daily diaries. I hope some of you also do that. So these antiques, they help the writers of the future to a great extent, because writers need substance, and substance that can be authenticated, right, from their past. When they write about their past, they need to authenticate it. Charles Dickens, when he wrote his Tale of Two Cities in 1859, he had to resort, right, to a few writers who had written on the French Revolution. He looked back on them. Shakespeare, again, right, his great influences in a comedy, in tragedy, were these great writers who again were influenced, right, intertextuality. So these antiquaries, you must remember them, because if they were not there, our literature would not be shaped in the way it is today. Like John Leland, English poet and antiquary, is the earliest of them. He's also known as the father of English local history, because he wanted to localize local knowledge. He was the first one to adopt the county method of writing down, county by county method of writing down his observations. A father of English local history and bibliography. So, antiquaries, how they shaped English literature. Before that, the humanists, how they shaped English literature. And then the educationists, how they have shaped the future of English literature. The Reformation and religious controversies, how they have shaped English literature. Now the antiquaries. Right? John Leland is an antiquary, and he is also called the father of English local history. Right? A few points, just a few bullet points about him from this book again. Nothing from the internet, because I want to give you authentic information. If I go to any unverified source on the internet, I'll be doing a great injustice to my students, right? So authentic information, please, when you write your dissertations also, don't just go to the internet where inauthentic sources are there. Always cite sources that you can personally authenticate, right? John Leland, he got his education at St. Paul's, London. Remember that school, right? John Colet, yes, right? William Lilly was the first headmaster when John Leland studied. See his education, right? At St. Paul's, London. In 1533, he was commissioned to examine all the ancient monuments of the country, especially the archives of the cathedrals, colleges, and abbeys. Uh, uh, and he was empowered. That's the next bullet point. Actually, he was empowered to study, to examine in all the libraries of all religious houses in England. So he was given a document of empowerment, whereby he can walk into any house, have a look at their books, antiques, collections, libraries. Um, some 15 years back, in the Department of English, we had a wonderful book, a very old book on rhetoric. This book was written published in the year 1889, the year I think our former Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was born. And this book was so, neat. The page, it's a hardbound book. I had to use it for my paper on rhetoric. So I borrowed the book from the English Department Library. We have a beautiful collection in the department library. You know that, right? I borrowed it. I had it for around 1 year, or then I didn't want to photocopy that book because it was so precious and the pages were so bristle. It could break any time. I didn't want to photocopy from the book. So I just kept it right in front of me very carefully. 1889, a book that I have in front of me. I didn't want to photocopy it so that I will not break the pages, the brittle pages. But they have already got into that LOE mode. But no dog's ears, cat's ears whatsoever. It's so beautiful, right? See how they've preserved it. Right from 1932, the seals are there. Right? People have borrowed it in our uh, past scholars, students of MCC, right? They have borrowed it. So I typed it out, right? Pages and pages, 20 pages I typed out, 20 or 25 pages. I put it up on the blog also. If you see canons of rhetoric, you can find it out. It's from that book, 1889. But then I didn't want to return this book to the library then, because our library was annexed to the main library. I didn't want to return it to the library then, because the librarian then, the past librarian, not the present one. The present one is good, right? The past librarian was not that interested in preserving these books. So I was a bit hesitant to return it, right? Everything was in shambles, disarray, shabby in those days in the library. Right. So it was filled with dust. If you enter the library in those days, sometimes you might even get a panic attack, asthma attack, or wheezing or whatever. So I didn't want to return it. But when the new librarian came, right, this present librarian came, after I was, because he went on a cleaning mode and he spruced up the library, ordered a lot of new books to be bought, right, enhanced the collection, did a lot of good work. So, I went to him and I showed him this book. He made me sit and I showed him this book. Sir, this book is a very old book. You can never find such a book anywhere for the rest of our lives. So I just want to give it to you. I've given an article on that in our blog, right? You can refer to it later. I told him, sir, please, I want you to have it carefully. Right? Although I had it for a year or so, I didn't want to, photocopy it. I just typed out from that. The main reason is I didn't want to break the pages of this book, which is already brittle. And he took it to the utmost care and he said, sir, rest assured, I will take care of it. And even today, it's there, adorning our prestigious good old library. So happy that the library is maintained in a very good condition today. Right? So these books, right? If someone had a book, Leeland walked into the house. Hey, how did you get this book? Who wrote this book? There's only one copy of this book in the entire world. And he started making a lot of that, right? And for 6 years, he journeyed house by house, cathedral by cathedral. And, he went to the monasteries, the dissolved monasteries, read, analyzed, and then, came up with this beautiful book. It's called Itineraries. See, in the third bullet point there, he spent 6 years traveling all around England, exploring all the libraries, and he published a formidable list of the wealth he discovered. But even today, we have what is called digital humanities, a field that is gaining a lot of concurrency and relevance today. Digital humanities. There is a particular subgenre called digital archiving. So this is another field, right, that connects with these antiquaries of the past, where you and I have a responsibility of being an antiquary, of preserving. For example, our library has a collection of approximately, I'm just saying, hypothetically, around 3 lakh books, 300,000 books. How many of these books will be preserved in the next 20 years? Even now, even right now, most of the research that we do is done online mode, right? All the books that we access, we do it online. Kindle is there, a whole lot of journals are there. They are given to us at a premium, at a subsidized rate. We access them. So after 20 years, 300,000 books, where are they going to go? And these are rare treasures. So if they are going to be digitized, will all the books be digitized? How much is the cost for digitization of these books? And who is going to do that? If some books are going to be omitted, which books will be omitted? Which books will be absorbed into the archives? Right? Digital archives is a subgenre there. Right? Many are working in this area today. If you are interested in digital humanities, maybe I can also connect you with a few great scholars who have been doing some sincere work for the past 10 or 12 years. Because we all know that all the libraries in the next 20 years will become defunct or extinct, go into oblivion. Everything will become digitized. You won't have such huge libraries. Within a small room, you'll have a complete repertoire of all these digital holdings for us. Right? So, in 1536, when the first Suppression Act was passed, look at the word Suppression Act was passed, Leeland expressed his angst and agony at the plunder and ransack of the monastic libraries. Right? He was aghast because he was one person who loved. Just imagine if the book that I had in my hand, right, was ransacked by somebody, how bad I would feel. Right? See, this is another book. This is by Richard Ledra. I don't know which year. I forgot to see it. I quoted this book for you mm, in the past class, right? Yeah, this book is also 19, yeah, 1936. Sorry, no, 1964, right? Yeah, Richard Ledra, right? Miracle of Language. Right? The page, some of the pages have come off, but right, yeah, we'll go into that later. So remember in the previous class, I told you about how the lawyers have bombastic, language, high flown. They had to argue their case. Thomas More was one, and so his Utopia was very convincing. We saw that, right? So, right, the first suppression act, Leeland felt very bad. He gave out his agony and his angst at the plunder and ransack of the monastic libraries. And this is the book that he wrote. It's a huge, even in the 20th century, it has been published in 5 volumes once again. Right? Such is the great popularity of his jottings. You can also do that, right? One day you'll find all your jottings uh, celebrated or sometimes even venerated. Leland's Itineraries, 1538 to 1543, right? 6 year period he wrote it. He made around 5 major English itineraries spread over 6 long years and jotted them down in his itineraries. 6 long years spread across 6 long years. And his itineraries are personal notebooks on his travels. His travels. As an antiquary, he went around places which contain information that he gained from personal observation, from oral sources, from books and libraries. In fact, his itineraries have been quite influential in the many chronicles. That's the last slide we'll be seeing today. The many chronicles which appeared in the later half of the 16th and the 17th centuries. See, antiquaries, itineraries, chronicles. They all have been instrumental in shaping literature of that era and the particular and the subsequent, right, ages also, periods also, right? So after antiquaries, we go into the chronicles, right? These are the major chroniclers of the age, the kind of historians. Without chronicling an age, the next age will not have access to the past. If the Indian independence was not chronicled for us today, we will not have access to what happened in those days. In the 19th century, what happened? In the 18th century, what had happened? You will not have an idea, an iota, or an inkling of what had happened, thanks to these chroniclers who took upon them the pain and the burden of putting all those things that they witnessed in pen and paper. So the 4 major chroniclers, the last one is Camden also, but the 4 major chroniclers who were greatly influential for subsequent writers is Hall, Holinshed, Stowe, and Speed, right? 2H and 2S. That's how I have in mind. Hall, Holinshed, Stowe, and Speed. Edward Hall's Chronicle, Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles, John Stowe's Summary of English Chronicles, and John Speed's History of Great Britain. See, these are all chronicles, historians, antiquaries. Antiquaries also doubled up as historians, chroniclers. William Camden also wrote a few chronicles. One is Britannia. In Latin, he wrote it. It was translated in 1610 into English. He also wrote History of the Reign of Queen Elizabeth, again in Latin. It was called Annals, translated into English in 1625, right? So we started with the antiquaries, moved on into the chronicles, and we have one more. We'll do that in the next class. Till then, right? That's all for now. I hope, right, you can read through whatever has been given here. By this evening, I think I'll also upload this on YouTube only for your sake. I'm doing it after my classes are over. Yeah, you can access them. And once again, if you can go through them, it will be a kind of a revision for you. And if there are any doubts, you can ask me now. Else, bye bye. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.